sign up for sort of your level of endurance. Anyways, we have about 8 or 9 commitments. We need 3 more. One of the reasons we're doing this is sort of team building effort for city employees. Hopefully, once we get our team organized, we'll approach the police and fire and get a little competition going here. Let's see, and then maybe we'll even see. It doesn't cost $125, so we are looking maybe per person. So we are maybe going to seek out some sponsorship opportunities, maybe with a limited edition T-shirt from the mayor's office. Yeah, June 19th. So Mr. Miller just joined our team mayor. So
I think you said they were 8.5. I'm the half.
Yeah, I think
about a half commitment.
So we thought if you were interested, we're trying to get this probably signed up by the end of next week because they're about priced at 70%. Yeah, they're already 70% full. So price is more than
all the 3 mile segments.
Oh, we got another top.
Can we share?
4 mile segments. How much for it? Really more than that.
I think I
didn't hear that part.
The total distance between the legs varies depending on which runner you are, from low, like 11 miles to high. If somebody has, I think, about 20. Over the total.
The total, yeah.
Individual totals.
I prefer the night.
Some of
No, the long ones go straight. There's like a 10-mile run where it's dusty road. It's really fun. It's really exciting, but it's dusty. Yeah, but just the short. I was the short leg. Yeah.
Well, if you're interested, approach me and Brian. Yeah. My birthday.
Oh.
No, but I think somebody else got to get permission before he's wild. To let him go. I think this is wedding anniversary. Is it her birthday?
What's the total time span?
Brian, you said it took about 22 hours.
Yeah, I've done this and others like it several times, and usually I just kind of around 22 to 26 hours.
It's really fun. Like we slept in a junior high on the floor. That wasn't fun, but yeah. I mean, it's a fun, really
Fill
a fun.
the van with a couple of 5-gallon thermos, and the thermos is a Gatorade, and brings them sleeping bags, and it's lots of fun.
Yeah.
Some of the other soft commits we have are John Borgett, Dixon Holmes. Let's see, Ryan. Myself.
Not soft.
No.
Well, until you pay up, it's soft.
So do you need exact names, or can you substitute names as it gets closer?
We can substitute. I guess the critical logistical thing is it's $1,500 for the team to register. We need to do that quickly. Whoever ends up footing the initial bill needs to be reimbursed quickly. But then you can sub people out up to the week before if you can find a replacement that's willing to pay, or if you're willing to forego your fee. You can always find places.
Okay, so just hit us up if you have further interest. Kim, that sounded like a soft commitment.
Yeah, I think I can do it.
Okay. We'll confirm that later in the week.
I might be able to do it too, as long as total time is not an issue.
Okay.
No, we're not trying to win.
Not trying to win it.
We're not trying to win it. No, we may step it up if we get if we challenge the police and fire. So you will have to
start training.
If we lose to them, we'll have to probably eat it somehow. But another quick thing, just item. You notice we called a special meeting. We could call it special work session. I think the generally uneducated population that isn't familiar, not uneducated, but unfamiliar population with what you guys do, don't understand the word retreat, and I think it could send messages that you're off for resorts. Yeah, and so that's actually been on my mind for many years. We just never really did anything about it. We made a change this week, called it a special meeting instead. No, I don't know if this really fits, but no good deed goes unpunished. Now, we receive at least a half dozen calls, emails, wondering what this was about. Say, well, it's just
Because
a
it's special.
yeah, it's just a
Cancer retreat.
yeah, it's just it's an unscheduled work session. So I mean, so I don't know what the exact right answer is. We were trying to solve one problem, wanted to get another one. I think as the public gets used to this item, they'll understand that. Hopefully, the intent is that you're not off partying. So that's it.
Thank you. With respect to the first item, may I, at the risk of repetition, signal a bit of history here. I formed the erroneous assumption, had the erroneous understanding earlier this year that the administration had asked the municipal council to spearhead the review and revision of the Vision 2030 document. When that document was produced early in Mayor Curtis's first tenure, I think that would be roughly 2009, 10. There was provision, as you know, in the statement for an eventual review and revision, and there were a number of action steps or proposed further steps to be taken, identified for most, if not all, of the 14 segments of that plan, with the understanding that they would unfold later on as the year 2030 approached. And again, my understanding was that the revision to be undertaken in 2015 at this, or for 2015 at an approximate 5-year distance, would review those action steps as well and suggest either their revision or addition to, so that what emerged by the outset of 2015 would be a new edition, if you will, of the Vision 2030 document. Subsequently, I learned that my understanding was incorrect, that the municipal council was not being asked to take the lead, but rather the administration would continue in its leadership role. But nevertheless, the municipal council would be closely involved, and we had at that point appointed a member, each member of the municipal council, each member of the council staff, to one of the subcommittees that these 14 subcommittees corresponding to the elements of the Vision 2030 plan. So at this point, the issue is before us is what to do by way of our commitment to the review and revision process. Bill Pepperoni was kind enough to send a memo last week that each of us received, I trust, in which he said, attached is a copy of the original statement. Please review it. Please recommend any changes to it. The committees will eventually come together and take up any recommendations that have been made and produce some kind of final revision for each of the elements of the plan. Now, I have read, and I trust you may have read the document in its entirety at some time in the past. I read it in order to be informed about it, in order to understand what it contained, in order to be able to refer to it and be knowledgeable when people called it to my attention. But I've never read it with the intent to revise it. And so in view of Mr. Pepperoni's email, I plan to do that. And I invite you to do the same. There's no requirement, but if you would, at some point, or at least those segments of it that are of most interest to you, to review and recommend your revisions without any reservation. And once completed, forward those to Mr. Pepperoni. The other step that we could take then is to look at the various subcommittees and to identify the chair of each, and then to understand that we will each contact that chair directly, the chair for the committee to which we've been assigned, contact that subcommittee chair directly and inform her or him of our interest in being involved.
Some of these obviously will need new members because
Some will. There are some deceased persons on this list, and so this has not been updated yet. Now, at the end, you will find our assignments, and Karen will be number 8. I believe the others all stand as indicated. Mayor, are you or Wayne in a position to inform us of who the respective subcommittee chairs are?
Probably.
You are listed as a member of the steering committee. So
Yes, was one of those. We've got three council members on the original steering committee as well.
Have you a copy?
I do not have a copy, but I'd be glad to go through one and just mark them. I think I can probably tell you who the chairs have been.
Let's just take a minute and do that. The leisure subcommittee.
It appears to me, Mr. Chairman, I think the first name on all of these lists
That's
is the chair, just as I'm looking through there.
Mr. Bush has passed on,
so heritage subcommittees. Stephen, have you heard anything with respect to that?
You'll have to.
no, I haven't heard anything. So Doug Bush has died. Gloria Wheeler, I don't know if she's still around.
She's back.
She is. She's back. Saw her at a neighborhood meeting recently.
The other two, Gene Shumway and R.G. Shumway, are still around. They're quite elderly. And I'm sure they'd perhaps be interested still.
Was there any intent on the administration's part to repopulate these subcommittees?
We clearly need to, yes.
But for the time being, we could assume that the first name listed as the chair.
The first name listed in each of the committees was the one that was designated.
Matt, would you please confirm that? And then,
Actually, on the education committee, I think Greg Hudnall chaired that one, as I recall. Mayor, do you?
I don't, I gave Wayne my list, so.
I gave him I think, yeah, that's the only one I can see that I think may be different.
should have an extra
Also,
copy.
on the Image and Communications Subcommittee, I chaired that.
Okay. That's right. Cliff Porter was the chair, Joe Miner was the chair of health.
And I'll bet Jeff Rust was our.
I think you're right. I think Jeff Rust was the prosperity committee chair. Kelly Ward chaired the transportation committee.
We're kind of debunking it first.
Yeah, we sure are. Yeah.
the list of exceptions is growing.
I know. Yeah, Radine chaired family and neighborhoods. Bill Okerstrom chaired public safety. Ned Hill chaired. Did Ned chair? I can't remember. Did Don Jarvis chair?
He was just
So Don would have been the natural resources group. Ron Clark did chair Unity, and Clark Thorstensen chair Leisure.
You just start at the beginning and.
Yeah, let's do it. Okay, Leisure Committee was Clark. Unity Subcommittee was Ron Clark, BYU, now retired, but he's still around, I think. Don Jarvis chaired Natural Resources. Doug Bush was the chair of Heritage. Bill Holterstrom chaired Public and Nonprofit. Brady Hatfield chaired Family and Neighborhood. Greg Hudnall chaired education. Brad Farnsworth chaired land use. Kelly Ward chaired the transportation subcommittee. Jeff Russ chaired the prosperity subcommittee. Gary Garrett chaired images communications. Coy Porter chaired safety, and Joe Miner chaired the health subcommittee.
Matt, if you'd be so good to contact Bill about a replacement chair for the Heritage Subcommittee, and then provide us with the contact details for each chair.
If Chairman Miller was a little confused, I think I bear the responsibility for that.
Oh, I'm not looking to blame you.
Well, I think, let me share with you a deep thought, or I don't know if concern would be the right word, that as the last election took place, it completed a 100% turnover of council members who had been involved with us originally on this document. And so that was of grave concern to me, because if you didn't feel ownership in this document, then it was less likely to be an impactful document. So I think I came at that time looking for ways to give you ownership, and probably didn't have a clear plan in my mind as I did that. And so as we move forward, I would articulate that goal, that whatever we do, that we get to the end of it and hopefully have you feel like you have ownership, and that this is a document that you can stand up and defend and promote. And so as we're moving through it, if you don't feel like we're moving in a direction that achieves that, then we clearly want to talk about it and resolve that.
I think it's important, Mr. Miller and the mayor's said, especially in light of taking a more of a policy governance approach to your work. And one of the policy documents we commonly refer to is Vision 2030. We refer to other ones as well, but and so that ownership, I think, is important because that's sort of some of the benchmarks that we're evaluating budgets and other actions against.
And I would say that I think those of us that were involved as elected leaders the first round were very careful to make sure this was not a document that reflected our agendas, but that it reflected the citizens' agenda. And so I don't think we're looking for input and suggestions personally, but I think guarding the fact that this is a document that's come up from our residents is still really important, and that it doesn't change at the whims of elected officials that come in with different things, that it kind of stands through that test, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Jim, please. Okay.
Can I make the assumption that on the steering committee, the 3 members of the council were on that committee? Sherry Hall, Rick Ely, and Steve Turley. Is that why they were on that committee, or are they on that committee because of, so will they be replaced by 3 members of?
We selected them because we wanted council involvement.
Okay. So you'd anticipate
current council members
changing those too.
Yeah. Now, possibly some of them could still serve, and maybe if not on the steering committee in other capacities.
Which there are, some of them are anyway.
Now, it looks like there's some that are on more than one committee. Is that right?
Yes, and I think that was a result, unless you correct me if I'm wrong, of almost a self-selection of, hey, I want to be involved in this, and this one's important to me.
In most cases, we allow the committee chairs to form their own committee, to bring people to the table. Again, recognizing we go through a more comprehensive process of vetting it, and which we did, and have online opportunities to comment and so on. And so I think, again, in some cases, committee members may have overlapped the people they invited to participate.
I noticed Sherry, however, it's just listed twice in the transportation. That's probably just an error, right?
No, I think she served on both.
No,
She's,
Oh,
yeah, I
just
didn't
twice
see
on
there.
both.
She double served.
She was very effective.
She got 2 votes.
She also served on the Energy Communications Group.
And she was in the family neighborhood group too, it looks like. So she's in the communications group.
She's not listed, but she came.
She did come.
I don't think that you would have sensed any restrictions on council members' involvement we wanted them, for the same reason of ownership, we would hope that they would participate wherever they wanted to.
I recommend then that once we receive the contact information from Matt, we make a point of contacting the chair within the next week just to introduce ourselves and introduce the administration's interest in having us join the subcommittee and to indicate our availability for such. Then,
are the subcommittees then going to be meeting? Are they aware of this as we contact them, or will this be something that they're hearing about for one of the first years?
The committee chairs will know. I don't know that there's been a lot of meetings. There's been mostly email interaction among the committee members as they've vetted some of these action steps with them. So they're aware we're going through an update to the process, but I don't know which committees have met. But I do know there's been ongoing email discussions among all the committees. And we have, based on the list Mr. Miller gave us, we have added each of you to the email list associated with those committees. So community development has updated those to make sure you're included. So, but again, a contact to the chair would be absolutely appropriate.
and then the further step of reviewing and revising the existing document is left to your discretion, with the hope that it might be something you would complete, say, by mid-November. Any further discussion there, please?
And just a moment, so your request is that we look at the document to see if there was anything we had to change by mid-November, and then these committees will be doing the same thing around the same time? We don't know
or
that
thereafter.
schedule.
Yeah, I don't think there's any timeline that's been published yet. But what I plan to do is review the entire document and to make my suggested edits, revisions, additions.
Those suggestions then will be passed on to the committees?
Correct. Correct. Yeah, when we finish here, or when you finish your review and revision, then just please send it to Matt, and he will sort of take it from there.
So when I read through the 2030, I thought it would be helpful to meet with the committees to find out what their original thinking was and why they listed certain things before making recommendations, because I just thought that would be helpful to know what the original vision was. There's some things that were, that I had questions about that would have been helpful to actually.
Nothing to prevent you from requesting that. Nothing at all. My guess is, and this is an ignorance, that I don't know what kind of record exists of their committee meetings in the past, subcommittee meetings in the past. But my guess is that there probably won't be much of a memory of those
Meeting minutes
kinds
weren't
of
taken,
things.
Gary, at those meetings?
Probably just,
They did take meeting minutes? Uh-huh.
yeah, it's probably more brief notes more than actual minutes.
Oh,
And moreover, I think we might provide a genuine service by just giving it a new eye, without any necessary knowledge of how it came about in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, that could be one approach, is that you look at it and then certainly they could always explain afterwards.
I think it's important to keep in mind they started with 0, and this was a groundbreaking effort. We couldn't find anybody who had done anything like this. There was no handbook, no templates, and so I think it's remarkable that they got to where they did, and I think they would all acknowledge that it could be better. That this was a group of people coming together and putting their best efforts forward, but it now has the test of time, and some of those things have already been accomplished. We need to take those off and replace them with more aggressive goals. So I think that there may be some egos in that, but for the most part, I think you would find people who would be glad that it was getting a new look and a new set of eyes and new ideas. Just look how our city's changed in 4 years. The downtown has changed, and East Bay's changed. It may be very relevant to be totally fresh.
Mayor, can you, I know the general plan actually has some things written to each of these, a lot of these areas anyway. And you're saying that the 2030 vision actually went in deeper than the general plan would normally do. Help us out.
I think the concept was that you have all of these layers. So on a day-to-day basis, we're down in the weeds. Then you go up a level, and you go up a level, and you go to the general plan. This was a level at 30,000 feet above the general plan, looking at much longer than a general plan, and much more in theory than in specifics.
Longer than a general plan.
Longer than a general plan. And also the general plan is put together with all of these constraints. And what we really seeked for with Vision 2030 was no constraints. Funding's not a constraint. Technology is not even a constraint. What do we dream? What do we, and originally we wanted it so far out there that you didn't have to be practical. You didn't have to say, well, that's not reasonable. What do we want our community to become? I think one of the things I would change is I would have pushed it further out. I would have probably gone 50 years. And maybe that's something that we need to look at it and say, is it far enough out? Because 2030 was all of a sudden not near as far away as it was when we started this. And so conceptually it was general plan has to be practical, has to be realistic, has to be achievable. This does not. This is a vision. This is this 30,000 foot dream. What if we just sat back and dreamed what we want our community to be? What would it be? And what's cool is it's remarkable when you get that in paper how all of a sudden that becomes achievable, and we're already clicking off and making progress on so many of those things that seemed quite unreasonable.
The other thing I might mention is this was perceived by the steering committee early on as a community vision, not a city vision. And so the idea was, let's involve the county health department in the health issue, and we hope they will adopt whatever part of Vision 2030 they see as being their role. We hope they'll put that in their general plan. And the school district will take the education component as well as the charter schools and say, what pieces of 2030 should we put in our plan? And so it was never designed to have a specific relationship to anyone's strategic plan, general plan, but it was designed for every element of the community to look at Vision 2030 and say, what do we need to do to make this happen? And so I wouldn't draw too much conclusion. The city staffed it at the mayor's request, but the city didn't run it. This was very much run by the steering committee and by the volunteer members of the committees. But it was never really intended to be a city product. It was designed to be a community product, and the city would figure out where it plugged in to Vision 2030. Those elements were then incorporated into the general plan.
I just remember that some of the things that we thought were blue sky thinking had actually happened, like the museum and the library on the Heritage Committee. I remember discussing, wouldn't that be great if something like that? And so I'm very pleased that it has kind of become a guide.
Just to make sure when you review the document that you're also reviewing that version that includes the action steps.
I think our single biggest challenge as we did it was keeping people out of the specifics. Everybody kept wanting to go to the specifics. So for example, it may have been a better goal to say enrich the community through opportunities to explore the past. Maybe that's too vague, but here again, that was the intent, is to be not specific, but these long-range targets. What do we want to be known for as a community? What do we want to become as a community? And not as many specifics. And we fought that at every turn. One of them was scheduled service at the airport. Well, that was pretty specific. That was accomplished before the document was done. And a good example of we just don't think it big enough and far enough out there.
Thank you very much, everyone. Gary, Dave, we'll turn to you.
Thank you. And to the mayor's point, I think everything on the communications, public image list has been accomplished too. So we're done.
In other words, you're short-sighted, huh?
Time to start over. So if you'll refer in your papers to the document that prepared for studio representation, this is in reference to our desire and our recommendation for accessing a second opinion or legal counsel in the event we have an issue that we feel would require that. And our committee, Dave and I, with Brian and Matt's help, and Bryce as well, has been meeting and considering this issue. We've looked at models in other cities. We had a community meeting on the 15th. That's the Monday before our previous council meeting at Los Hermanos, and had several people there that reviewed these thoughts, and we got some input from them as well. So I'll just go over them generally, and then I'll look for your input and feedback as well. So referring to the major bullet points here that make up our recommendation, I'll read them generally, and then we'll get into the details of each one. Continue to rely on city attorney's office for legal representation and counsel. Allocate existing budget monies, and there should be an F in there, for independent counsel legal representation. Develop a list of approved counsel with a procedure for adding individuals and firms. And 4, and I just reworded this one, but provide all council members with access to independent counsel on the list up to a predetermined amount. So those are the 4 general guidelines that make up our recommendation. Now we're touching on each a little more specifically. The first one, we of course will always encourage our council members to get to know, become familiar with our existing city legal staff, so that we can give them priority and make sure that we're utilizing this resource to the fullest extent that we can. Any comments on this? Maybe we'll just stop after each one of these and see what thoughts you have about any of these. Any thoughts on this first?
How would we do that? I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm.
How would we get to know the staff without interfering with their work or schedule?
Great comment, great input, and it may be an opportunity for us to have members of the legal staff come participate with us on a regular basis in our work sessions and become acquainted with their area, their field of expertise and their strengths, and so we would know. And that's a great thought, Stephen.
And that was a question I had. Were they hired with specific expertise in mind? Is there certain attorneys that, should we have a question about certain things, that
decide whether the administration or the legislature, you know what I mean? You know what I'm saying? It kind of puts you in a position as the decision maker on whether this is good or not when it's council driven and maybe policy driven, but you know the administration's adamantly opposed to it. And like I said, I don't have an example. It's just I'm throwing it out there.
And it's hard without specific examples. I would go back to the principle I just espoused, which is that it's quite clear from the rules that it's not my job to be evaluating policy decisions. Right, so to the degree that I'm supposed to evaluate whether something is a detriment to the city or not in abiding by the confidentiality rules, they don't mean by detriment whether it's good or bad policy. They mean there's probably some example other than something that's illegal versus legal, but that's really the only one I can think of. It's really at that level of someone's about to engage in criminal behavior, or someone's about to I don't know, release security details to terrorists.
And that's the only reason why you would then disclose to to Robert West, to the administration, whatever information was given to you. But if it's policy and it's a difference in policy or difference in approach, that's something you feel confident you could keep 100% confidential.
Yes. Now here's the one caveat: is we've spent this whole conversation talking about confidentiality of the council versus the administration.
But you're the city.
There's one big caveat, which is confidentiality within the council, right? Because there's 7 members of the council, and so maybe in my mind even the more serious question, the ones we've been asking, is what happens when a council member comes to me and says, I want to do something, and I'm not sure any of the other 6 think it's a good idea, so I don't want you to tell any of them.
That it's not going to go anywhere unless they're all involved at some point. So I mean,
well,
or at least 3 others are involved.
And that's
you know
the
what
thing
I mean?
is most of the confidentiality issues we're talking about are timing issues, right? Because eventually, unless the extent is we do some research on something and decide it's not the right way to go, and then it never goes anywhere and just stays confidential. But for the most part, most of these issues are someone's going to come to me and say, let's look at this, and then eventually it's going to become public to everybody because it's going to be a proposal, right? But this is the issue where the one caveat that I made to both Dave and Gary is that I think everybody needs to understand about this outside counsel issue is if you hire out, and this applies to me too, so this same principle applies to both me and to the outside counsel. Since the duty of that person is to represent the council as an entity, when individual council members come and say, can you keep this confidential, the answer ought to be, well, I can keep it confidential from the administration, but I can't keep it confidential from other council members because I don't represent you as a person or you as a person. I represent all 7 of you as a body.
Right. And I can't imagine why you would, I mean, I can't imagine that scenario, you know, where that would happen, where you wouldn't want, you need other council members to be on board if you're going to get anything done. So,
well, and hopefully that's always the case, but at some point there could be, 5-2 splits, 3-4 splits. So I mentioned I don't know who all read it, but I mentioned in last week's summary of kind of activities that the week before I had been to the International Municipal Lawyers Association conference in Baltimore, and that one of the sessions was a special session on issues of representing legislative bodies, right? And one of the things that came out of that was that in almost all jurisdictions, it's the city attorney that represents both bodies. So that's why they were having a special session on it to discuss how it works, right? But one of the issues, one of the comments that was made that really resonated with me, and I think we've talked a little bit about it before, is that when you represent a body, your job is to represent the consensus of the body. once the 4 of you vote for it, my intent is, and I think my job is, to, in public meetings, not discuss the reasons why it can be challenged anymore. Right? Because now, at least unless there's some change being made in how it works, but now my job is to advocate for the consensus, which is to make it happen. Right? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So, which is one of the reasons why it's very good for a lot of these discussions to go on actually before, right? Because a lot of that stuff, sometimes there's been, I don't know if we're getting sidetracked. I've had discussions with some of you before about how, you know, there's times when we're in a public meeting and a question gets asked and you're surprised by the answer. And what I've expressed in return is that oftentimes I'm surprised by the question, right? And the goal, I think, for all of us should be for that not to happen. For the questions to be asked before the meeting and the answers to be given before the meeting, so that there aren't surprises taking place in a public meeting.
Mm-hmm. So,
I was just going to point out that actually the administration didn't like the transportation utility fund. And our original proposal didn't include it. And it was the council that asked us to go back and put it in.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Brian. Helpful clarification and differentiation between the privilege and confidentiality. And so we'll include that language in here as well.
Would you, just as another bullet point under one, just a sentence, would be sufficient? And to follow up Kim's comment and questions, I think we will agree amongst ourselves that any one of us or any combination of us should always feel free to seek Brian out for counsel, understanding that we should not ask him for confidentiality with respect to other counsel.
From within the
correct.
Oh, within the council, right?
Correct.
No, and my main question is, if we have an idea and it's just budding, right? It's just the beginnings of an idea, but we know that maybe it's not something administration off the bat. We've heard, you know, that they're not excited about that route, right? But we want to see it blossom. We want to get it to a point where we can see if it's viable. Mm-hmm. What I wouldn't want to happen, and I appreciate the mayor saying that they were able to go back to the drawing board and kind of look at that, because what I wouldn't want to happen is to have it get shut down by administration. I mean, you have a good messaging machine. You do what you do really well, and that's what I would worry about is, could that get shut down before it even has a chance to blossom? And I don't mean that, you know. That's what I would like to see happen, is that we have an idea, let's figure it out and see where it can go, even if at the offset you're not excited about it.
May I express my opinion?
By all means.
So I would hope that all of you could feel that you could address not only Brian, but even Wayne and Gary McGinn and Dave Decker, and have a conversation, something along the lines of, I'm not sure this is ready enough to be explored, but I'd like to talk to you in confidence about an idea I have. And I could even see a conversation with Wayne that would say something like, look, I don't want the mayor to know I'm thinking about this yet, but can you give me your opinion on how he would react to this? Can you tell me, Dave Decker, how this decision was reached? And it's just in its infancy. I'm really not crazy about people knowing and explore. I would hope that all of you could have those conversations, and then the two of you, you and whoever you're speaking with, would have the good judgment to know how much to keep confidential and when it's in the interest of everybody to keep it confidential. So I would actually expand this beyond Brian and would trust you with Wayne to ask the same thing, and then trust Wayne to know, to tell you, I can't, don't tell me, because I can't, or yes, let's have a conversation about it, and you can trust me not to tell him.
Does that put city staff in a really uncomfortable position, though? Where
I think it's life, right? Yeah. I think it's just life, right? And so, first of all, we're dealing with this very hypothetical, right? I mean, so, but I don't know if Stephen felt like that this Third South thing was just terrible disaster, and he wanted to sit down and have a private conversation with Dave Decker about it. I would want him to be able to feel that was safe. And I don't Wayne, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but I don't think we've given the mandate to anybody, at least while I've been here, that you must tell us if you've had a conversation with a council member.
That's true.
And
There have been many, many times over the years, even during the prior mayor's administration, when things were a lot more tense, there were still conversations going on between administrative staff and council members that the mayor wasn't aware of. And again, I think in the interest of good policy, it's what we want to do. We're all interested in making sure that the right policy decisions are made.
So to have that open
yeah,
communication.
so if you approached Wayne and said, Wayne, I'm going to share something with you, and I need to know you want to share with the mayor, then I would trust Wayne to explore enough with you whether or not he could do that, right? And he may, you may go partway into the conversation, and he may say, okay, you got to stop. Look, I'm not going to endorse a mutiny. If you want to take his life, you've lost me. But
Well, he's your right-hand guy. How
No,
is he
but
not?
because Wayne,
How is that not an uncomfortable position? You don't feel like that would be
no,
uncomfortable at all,
because
Wayne? Okay.
let's do a hypothetical. Let's
Okay.
suppose it's 300 South is one that, boy, it's a future BRT, right? I mean, it's showing those types of controversy. And I think if Stephen felt like he was at odds with me and wanted to be on the same page with me, I think it'd be totally appropriate to approach Wayne and say, look, can I share with you in confidence why this is bugging me? And do you see a path, Wayne? And do you know the mayor pretty well. Do you see how we could merge? And if it ever got off to a point where it was Wayne could keep it confidential, I think he would very quickly say, look, we're now going into a place where I can't. And I would hope now that's an aspiration. I don't say it's absolutely guaranteed, but that would be an aspiration that you could have that conversation really with anybody in the city and feel safe. And all in the interest of getting to the best answer at the end. And so this is easy for me to support because I actually would be comfortable with it being broader than just Brian.
And I would just add to that on top of all of the philosophical principles that the mayor has just said, in this particular instance, my assignment is actually to you, right? So, I mean, my assignment, it's been made clear to me by both the mayor and by Robert, is that my assignment is to represent you. And so I don't have any discomfort with that at all. I think the only thing I would ask is if that situation rises, please let me know that your intent is for it to be confidential, because what I don't want to have happen, I could easily foresee happening, is you come ask me a question and I go, oh, Camille knows lots more about that than I do, and so I go ask her, not knowing that you wanted it to be confidential.
Mm-hmm.
That's really my only concern, is knowing whether you want it to be confidential or not.
One advantage I see over maybe Ogden or Salt Lake's model, where the city attorney himself is representing the entire entity before the council all the time, and that having Brian assigned allows Brian to be intimately connected to your policies, your directions, where he's thinking about where does the council want to go, and trying to view legal questions in that sole light, rather than trying to view those legal questions in the full light of everybody's agenda or directive. So there is advantage, I think, to having Brian assigned to the council, because he's thinking, okay, where's the council's policy on this? And that certainly may affect the legal interpretations and answers.
And if you feel like you don't have the answers to that, like if you would go to Camille or go to Schreiner or someone else in the legal department for answers, would you then tell us that, you know what, I don't feel like I have all the answers there, maybe this is a time where you could get outside legal or whatever the case may be, where we would need. And I don't know, as far as confidentiality with other members of city staff as well, if they, I don't know how that works, but
I think this goes along with what the mayor said before. I think we'd have to have an exploratory conversation, right? What I would come back to you with is something to this extent of, I don't know the answer to that. Here's our options. I can do the research and find out the answer. I can go ask somebody else on our staff, but ask them before I ask the question whether they're comfortable keeping it confidential between the two of us. Or I can recommend that you go to outside counsel and handle it that way. And that would be, that's why I think almost all these things start with the conversation about what's the intent and what's the expectation.
Mhm.
And my commitment to you is that I don't know that I can commit to you right now. I will always say I can keep it confidential, but I will always tell you whether I can or not, if that makes sense.
Just add to, when I was in Ogden, Gary Wilson was not the city attorney, he was the Brian. And he'd been assigned to council, and when the city attorney left, become a justice court judge, Gary was appointed city attorney and he kept the city council. So just so you know, that's been the history. It was sort of the chief deputy city attorney who was assigned to the council, and when he was promoted, he just kept that assignment as he moved forward. So
great helpful discussion on this point, and I've made several notes. Let's touch briefly on budget, which is the second bullet here. And as you can see, we recommend that this comes initially from funds, and we've discussed this with Matt, already budgeted. There are some funds that have not been allocated or are allocated to the kinds of programs that this could support. And we purposely left those amounts unidentified here. When we had them in an original document that we shared with the neighborhood group, it became a great distraction. And how much was enough? And was this enough? And where would more come from? So the principle here is that monies this year would come from funds we have budgeted. We could allocate additional funds as they're needed. We can allocate more next year. To an extent, we can roll over some funds, but that we could find and access the funding and appropriations necessary to meet these needs. Any thoughts on budgeting? Okay.
Yeah, just the thought that when we ask a question, and I mentioned this at the luncheon, I don't know if I'm asking a 4-hour question or if I'm asking a 20-hour question, and so that would be something that if we have someone say come and help us with a land use issue or whatever it might be, and we don't really know what we're asking up front, how they're going to bill it, what it's going to take hour-wise or money-wise. That would be my only concern, is making sure that they could actually complete the task given what we have, or that we'd be willing to appropriate more if we felt like that was something really important that needed to get done. Because I know most of them mentioned that it's just not enough. It's 5,000 would be like maybe 20 hours or and so and that was kind of
combined council members appropriations.
So
it could be up to 15 if you have enough support within the council. That's what it's.
So that's under the fourth bullet, and maybe just to touch on that briefly because it relates to what you're saying, Kim, and that's providing all council members with access to independent counsel up to a predetermined amount. So we have to decide what that is, what's appropriate, so that you would know at any time you could call on council and be supported by the budget. And then under the first bullet point there, it says that it refers to the fact that 2 or 3 council members could basically pull their their allocations to access more legal time.
And I think this contemplates that at any time that this allocate additional funds if and when needed. I think, as we discussed in the committee, what that means is that any time you've got 4 council members willing to say we're going to vote to appropriate more money, you can always do that.
Sure.
You can get more money at any time as long as you actually have 4 that are willing.
And the thought was, initially with this approach, was we have an existing adopted budget. I do have some miscellaneous budget already for some miscellaneous purposes of professional service, also a contingency budget. And the idea, rather than setting a set amount, let's utilize that resource that's available today until it's exhausted. If not, then we'll have that at the end of the year. The reason why I suggested to the committee that not to proceed with a specific allocation yet is it then becomes in the public meeting an issue about spending money rather than forming the right policy. Okay, and so do you really want to limit your policy surrounding a money debate, or you'd rather formulate the right policy and deal with the money when you need to?
To me, I think the important thing is just that we're getting a mechanism in place, and I agree with what he said as far as the starting amount isn't really the important issue. And as far as whether it's a 4-hour or a 20-hour question, I think any attorney on the list would need to be aware of our policy here, so they would know that unless the whole council is asking them to do it, that they shouldn't exceed this amount.
The procedure I envision would be, as part of the formulation of this list, that after whatever procedure we go through to form the list, a contract would be issued with those individuals or firms, and it would outline, this is the manner in which an individual council member may engage with you. You're authorized to work so many hours with that individual, and so forth. So that'll all be spelled out in the contract.
And that brings us to the final bullet, which is number 3 here, the approved list of individuals, firms. In this meeting that we had with neighbors, former council members, Neil Lindbergh was referred to regularly as a land use specialist, and clearly someone who we would include on this list, and others as well, that would be recommended by any council member and reviewed by our committee, approved by the council chair as we assemble this list of people who are approved. I think the final comment that I would make is that doesn't really fit into one of these areas, but and I don't think that Kim will mind my referencing her in this comment, because I think all of us would agree that a comment that she made in the neighborhood meeting that we held was just her desire, and I think all of our desire, to feel able and have access to independent counsel that we could use with confidence and without fear that we're sending a message that we don't, none of us wants to be tomorrow's headline, and that we are seeking independent counsel on it. So somehow we have to find a way that we can each use this approach and this guideline in a way that we are comfortable accessing members of our internal staff, outside counsel, and not send a message that we legitimately have issues that we want to discuss and share and come to terms with. So that's only a comment. Brian?
Could I make my comment from committee meeting the other day when you brought that up? In the interest of trying to help you with that, when Gary mentioned that in our committee meeting the other day, I had this thought, which is that I think I can, as part of my service to you, help with that very issue in this way, which is that where I foresee the headlines coming from is I get a phone call from a media outlet that says so-and-so says that they've been consulting outside counsel and that they say this, and I have no knowledge of that. Or we're in a public meeting and someone says, a member of the council says, well, I talked to the outside attorney and they said that the right answer is this, and everybody looks at me and I say either I had no idea that was a question, or well, yeah, I knew that was the answer. That's what I would have told you if you had asked me, right? So the comment I made in the committee is, and I don't mean that, I don't want this to come across too strongly, because if there are fact-specific individual reasons why you don't feel comfortable doing this, I respect that. But to the degree that we're worried about this issue about the PR perception, I think I can help with that if you felt like you had a concern that you thought you needed to go to outside counsel with, and you came to me first and said, here's the reason why I think you don't know enough about this, here's the reasons why I'm concerned I might not like your answer, here's the reasons why I think this might be a conflict, or here's the reasons why I think this might be a confidentiality issue. And then I can be informed and say to you, either say, actually, I totally agree with you, there's no reason for you to go out, or say, I think those are great reasons for you to seek outside counsel. So when somebody asks me why you're seeking outside counsel, I can say, oh, they talked to me about that before and they had some great reasons why that was necessary. And I wholly agree with the fact that they went out to do that. I think that protects each of you a little bit from ways that this could be manipulated by the outside. But again, to the degree that in a fact-specific incident you didn't feel comfortable doing that, it's by no means a requirement or a rule or anything. But I think my sense is it would be helpful to you from the PR aspect of handling this.
I think an important concept that I hope we can get across is that the main reason for doing this isn't just to resolve other important reasons to having this consult outside counsel when they need to. I know, like during the Provo times and other
Rock Canyon,
and other things. So I'm hoping that we can communicate that this is about making the best policy decisions. If we need specialized expertise, that there may occasionally be reasons to do this. And when we access the council, it doesn't mean that there's a problem. It doesn't necessarily mean that there's a problem between council and the mayor or the administration. And I just wanted to also specifically mention that Mayor Curtis has actually been very helpful and supportive in this process, and he actually contributed some ideas that have helped us come up with this proposal. And I really appreciated that, and I appreciated him coming to our lunch, and part of the reason for that was to help communicate this, that we're really working together on this.
thank you. Yeah, absolutely.
We'll refine this document based on your great input here today. And back to you, Mr. Chair.
Just one follow-up question. As we put this in place, I know a lot of the comments from others have been, the old city attorney was a very good land use attorney, and he gave us so much input, and we made such good decisions because of that. So I think we have a possibility here, and maybe it's just a small one, that we use this policy to get expertise that's not necessarily legal expertise. And so how do we define, or how do we decide, okay, we're getting outside legal expertise, or we're getting outside land use expertise? And determine whether this or...
Well, frankly, that's a pretty common to do that anytime we obtain a consultant in the city, whether it's the administration or the council. We are either do resources here internally that we can't absorb some type of work, or that we do need a special set of skills to address an issue, and so we frequently seek outside help. And I think that's a valid paradigm to view this through, is this is a way to obtain extra help when needed.
And I guess my question goes more to the point of, it misused, this tool is used for something that we have other tools for, and how do we distinguish when to use whatever tool we use to get outside?
Right, so I think and to Mike and Wes listening, the other consultants and this policy is that you've already got principles in place for consulting experts in other areas, but this is kind of an exception to that rule, where the policy for consulting other experts is to get 4 members to vote for hiring the consultant and paying them, and this is an exception to not have to have 4 people to do it for the specific question of legal advice. So
yeah, I think one additional thought on that is that individual seeking specific questions is maybe unusual for our organization, because we're a much larger organization that usually has our own staff for things. But smaller will have a paid staff planner, paid staff engineer that actually work out of some firm. They're not an agent or employee of the city, and they're at the disposal of any council member or mayor for any questions likewise. And so in some ways, this is if you look at it through that lens, as this is sort of a contract employee that you could call upon.
Thanks again. Al?
Will you, do you feel comfortable that you will have for our consideration at the next work meeting a draft that could be approved?
Because we'll be together again on the 2nd, and then our next meeting is the 7th.
Should we schedule it then for the general council meeting later in the same day for adoption?
Don't if you want necessary, because I don't think adopting this requires resolution. It's I think basically it's an internal policy that could be added to the policy handbook. In the past, those have just been handed to you whether you want to make it.
No, that's fine. Thank you for the clarification. Good. But may I introduce the last item with an anecdote, recognizing the fraud. I had a conversation 3 weeks ago with a gentleman who was a retired dentist who bought a home in Provo. In fact, not far from where I live, though I'd never met him. Children knew, and they found that they quite enjoyed it. And in order to make it more comfortable, especially for her who had arthritic knees, he had a kitchen installed in the basement. And that would be a convenience when family was there or they were watching television rather than going upstairs in the kitchen, downstairs. She then subsequently passed away, and even though he kept the house, he found that he wasn't really coming all that often. And then a granddaughter approached him about living there. Even though he would not, she would live there as a student at the university, and would that be all right? And he indicated to her that why not? In your family, and this is something that we have in place. It really seems reasonable for you to do that. Then came so she did, and then came a fateful knock on the door from the city of Provo saying, "Do you have a kitchen in your basement?" "Yes, we do." "Well, you better take it out because you can't have it there." And his question to me with these piercing retired eyes was, "That's my property. Why can't I do with it what I will? As long as it's in my family, why can't I do that?" Now, you might wonder how that gets to the good landlord program, because he technically was not a landlord, but were he to attempt to rent the house, then he would be. And that would place him in a different kind of jurisdiction, it would seem, as a landlord than merely as a property owner. Most of the time when we see good landlord programs in place, they meet the interest of the community in assuring health and safety, in ensuring ethicality, in ensuring that there is propriety to the way in which properties are made available to renters and maintained with their interests in mind. And communities will install such policies with incentives so that it becomes fiscally advantageous to the landlord to be on the good side. We visited this issue as a council together with the administration approximately a year and a half ago, and I don't know that there was ever any kind of formal resolution, but it was decided that at that particular point in time, given the fact that we had just recently adopted a new ordinance for business licensing, that there wasn't sufficient incentive to allow a good landlord program to flourish in the city. In my conversation with this gentleman, which at least I sensed that it was a very deeply felt conversation, suggested to me that we still have some unresolved matters, that the code is not sufficient, the regulations are not sufficient to, on the one hand, protect the interests of the property owner as in terms of the use of her and his property, and on the other hand, we're not yet at a point where we can confidently assert that our program, that our policies with respect to rental properties dissolve all of the potential problems. There is no problem that comes to my attention more often than this, over and over and over again. And I think it is something that may deserve our attention once more. I'll say that by introduction and turn to Matt.
I just wanted to offer that we've prepared some background information because several of you are not privy to those previous conversations with the council, and so a little primer to get you up to speed. This is actually probably 2 or 3 different issues I picked out of Mr. Miller's preamble here that we talk good landlord programs. We actually do not have a good landlord program yet. We have rental dwelling licensing, which is one set of standards. And there's other sets of standards like second kitchens, which are a completely different section of code. So we weren't particularly prepared to address those type of issues, but we would be happy to come back and do that, depending on how this goes.
That's just a general question. I'm not really that familiar with this, but it seems like many times when I've talked to realtors, they've talked about the realtors' good landlord program that they would like Provo City to adopt. Is that what this is?
This is related
so this
to
came
that.
from the realtors?
I don't know if it came from, however, the apartment association is heavily involved. And after we're done with this presentation, actually Mr. Tom Wood, who approached Mr. Miller with some interest in sharing some information, is here. He teaches one of the classes from the Good Landlord program training that the apartment association does, as well as some of his own training, I understand, through his own company. And that will get you maybe a little more familiar with what this program relationship is.
Are you affiliated with the realtors?
I'm a licensed real estate instructor. I have a lot of realtors that take my class. I've got a class scheduled on October 13th at the Board of Realtors in Salt Lake, and I teach a good landlord class. Most of them take it for CE credit, score credit, so they really like it. But it's been very well received by realtors. It's basically the same course. It originated in Ogden in 2006, and so realtors kind of latch onto it. I was actually president of the Apartment Association at the time. That program was started in Ogden, and I taught for them for 3 years. I've been doing it on my own for years, so I'm pretty familiar with the program. Its successes and its drawbacks.
So we're actually trying to turn to Bryce. He's prepared the presentation, give you a little bit of background. It wasn't, the council didn't just deal with this 2 years ago. I think this has been ongoing for about 6 at least. So maybe more. So Bryce.
All right, yeah, like Matt said, this isn't necessarily Provo City's history with it. There've been different programs that have been proposed to Provo City. This is more talking about what the legislature allows in a good landlord program. And so really this good landlord program was developed out of fees. Some cities felt that they found from experiences that the costs for the city to provide municipal services for rental occupied housing were higher than those for owner-occupied housing. For example, some cities found that the cost for law enforcement is different between renter-occupied and owner-occupied housing. And so the origin of the statutes for the Good Landlord program is all about trying to provide fairness in how you, basically how you charge those fees. And so,
could I just elaborate on that just a little bit? And I think talk about fees. If you take two equivalent units, one let's just use single-family home as a basis. Both those single-family homes may be paying the same rate of property tax, but the rental may generate twice or 3 times the amount of calls for service than the owner-occupied one. And so through a study, and that's part of the requirements, you determine if that's actually the case, and Bryce is going to get into this, that's when you can charge rentals a disproportionate fee for that increased cost of service because you're a rental versus an owner-occupied. Just to elaborate that.
So this is just a brief legislative history about the state of Utah and what they did. And so in 1997, the legislature passed a bill which authorized the city to charge a business that causes a disproportionate amount more the amount that is reasonably related to that disproportionate cost. And so if one business has the police to come 5 times on average per week, and another business, and all the other businesses on average only have 1, then those 4 extra calls can be charged basically that's what the disproportionate cost is above what the normal requirement is for the others. Also in 97, the legislature passed a bill that clarified that the city could require a landlord to obtain a business license and authorize the city to inspect rental units. And so moving forward to 2005, the legislature passed a bill that enacted specific provisions regarding disproportionate costs caused by rental housing, and that bill placed a cap on the fee that can be charged. And so it also included a provision regarding a reduction in the fee if the landlord implements measures to reduce crime or to reduce that disproportionate cost. So you can actually give them money back if they take efforts to make sure that those disproportionate costs are no longer an issue. Yeah.
And one thing I think that was important to remember is also that the rental, you have to do it by type. You can't do it by area in the cities. Is that right? Because we tried to look at some of those things.
That's not necessarily.
That's what Matthew Godfrey's presentation was all about. Was trying to. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead.
It was just Matthew Godfrey basically came and he said we can prove that there is a more substantial cost in this area surrounding BYU where there's primarily rentals. There's more cost for police and fire than there are in other parts of the city, and so they were going to use that as a basis for charging a more substantial fee.
Then why couldn't we do that? Have done that with the business licensings too? Because they said some of those.
Yeah, that's actually part of the bill in 2009. They came back and said you can no longer do that for businesses, but you can still do that to rental dwellings.
Okay, you can do that for rental dwellings.
That's what the 2009 bill. That's what the 2009 bill that also added a requirement that the municipalities were prohibited from increasing or decreasing fees without first performing a study, and requiring that you do a fee every 4 to 6 years. In that same bill, there was also a provision that said, and I think I have it here. It included a provision regarding a reduction in the fee if the no, that's the wrong one. It's back here. So in 2000. Sorry. Okay. In 2012, it was actually 2012, the bill removed the general provision that authorized the municipality to impose a disproportionate fee on businesses other than rental housing businesses. This removal didn't impact the rental housing businesses though. It just impacted the regular businesses.
Just the regular businesses, because I knew we couldn't do that with business, so.
So yeah, that wasn't going to be part of my presentation, but it's a good point. So, so yeah, as we can see in 2009, there were additional requirements that were placed upon him, and those were both in 2012 removed. So there's no longer a requirement that a study has to be performed in order to reduce or increase that the rental fee, and all those requirements relative to the mandatory study have been removed, basically. So I'm going to talk about the current statute regarding the Good Landlord Program. The current Utah statute authorizes the municipality to charge a landlord a residential unit fee to recover the municipality's disproportionate cost of providing municipal services to residential units compared to similarly situated owner-occupied housing. But the municipality has to do three things. First, a study has to be performed. Second, the municipality has to establish a good landlord program. And we're going to talk about the Good Landlord Program here in a bit. And third, the municipality provides a fee reduction if the landlord complies with the requirements of the municipality's Good Landlord Training Program. And those, the Good Landlord Training Program is just designed to encourage those business practices that would reduce those disproportionate costs. So, a statute that requires the Good Landlord Training Program requires the landlord to one, complete the landlord training, which is usually provided by the municipality or a designee of the municipality. Also, it states that it should be noted that property managers of these properties can be substituted for the landlord, so they can hire a property management company to go to these for them. Second, it requires the landlord to implement measures to reduce crime in the rental housing as specified in the municipality's code. So there has to be an element of crime reduction as part of the Good Landlord Program. And third, it requires the landlord to operate and manage rental housing in accordance with applicable municipal ordinances. And so this is where zoning enforcement can come into play. Next slide.
Bryce?
Yeah.
In regard to that last one about applicable municipal ordinances, can you comment on whether the, I think it's called the Fit Premises Ordinance,
What?
some Fit Premises or something like that? There was
Fit Premises Act.
The Fit Premises Act. It had something to do with there was an inspection, certain safety conditions had to be met. I don't know much about it, but a constituent mentioned in an email. Is that still?
I'm not 100% sure on that, but as I understand it, the city can make up the requirements that they'd like to be involved in that Good Landlord Program. And so if the Fit Premises Act meets what the council's interested, I think that they can do that. And we have a few examples of what other cities have done that we'll get to in a little bit as well, but I'm not sure. Maybe Tom can answer that question.
The Fit Premises Act outlines the duties and responsibilities of landlords and tenants, but it's actually the first part of the Good Landlord presentation that I do is the Fit Premises Act. We talk about 5 duties of habitability, like providing water, heat, locking doors and windows, electricity, and then maintaining air conditioning. If you have things like that, a lot of owners don't understand they're legally obligated to maintain for tenants. But we also discuss what the tenants' responsibilities are too, because believe it or not, they have some. But we also tell them that they have rights and explain, if you don't take care of your property, this is what the tenants can do and what their recourse is. We just try and educate them on things like that. But at this point, the other cities that have good landlord programs just use the Fit Premises Act. Although you're free to go beyond that if you'd like and add to it.
Okay. So moving forward, a rental unit is exempt from the Good Landlord Program or from this fee, more specifically, disproportionate fee, if it contains no more than 4 residential units on in the building and the owner lives on the premises. However, so duplexes and fourplexes are exempt if the owner lives in the home in one of the units, but this exemption does not apply to single-family homes. So if single-family homes are being rented, then they would still have to be participate in the Good Landlord Program in order to receive that reduction in that fee.
So what if a landlord, for example, is single and he lives in his home and he has roommates? So he would be included in this.
As I understand, it only applies to duplexes and fourplexes, not single-family homes, if it's a single-family home. So if there's 4 units within a structure and he lives in one of those units, he doesn't have to, he's not going to be charged a disproportionate fee. Is that, as you understand it?
Yeah, that's correct. The problem that you have with something like that is that about 1 in 1,000 is actually going to ask for a business license to do that. So you're not collecting a fee on them anyway because they didn't come to you and ask for a business license.
Should they though? I mean, is that?
If he's collecting rent, he's getting $600 a month in rent, he's making $7,200 a year. It sounds like it ought to be licensed to me, but most people just don't.
By law, it should be though.
By law, it should be.
Yeah. And so, and a municipality cannot require a landlord to deny tenancy to an individual who's been released within the past 4 years from probation or parole. So that's also something that should be considered. Next slide. So a municipality may not, without cause and notice, require a landlord to submit to a random building inspection. This is all part of the current statute. And if a municipality adopts a disproportionate rental fee, and with that comes a good landlord program and a fee reduction, the municipality also shall provide an appeal process affording due process of law to a landlord who is denied a disproportionate rental fee reduction. So now we want to get to the municipal services. Now these are the municipal services for which the city can develop these disproportionate costs. And you know, there's some that might be hard to prove, like snow removal, but there's others like code enforcement, police, fire, that certainly might have a more reasonable expectation of determining a disproportionate fee. And so I just wanted to show these to you so you can see the different fees that are allowed, that we can do a disproportionate fee based on these separate areas, these services. All right, next slide. And then this is as of June 2014. These are the 15 municipalities, according to the Utah League of Cities and Towns, that impose a disproportionate fee. And so if you impose a disproportionate fee, you have to have a good landlord program and a fee reduction in place, tool in place. And so these are the 15 cities that essentially have a good landlord program. If you want to, I don't know if you want to. Do you want me to go back? Okay, so that brings us to our policy questions. If the council were to pursue the Good Landlord Program, what objectives would you like to accomplish? And Ogden, for example, was primarily interested in the crime prevention and reduction. But as I researched a little bit more about Logan, they were more interested in these two areas because they started out their process with they were concerned about the student housing that was overtaking some of their neighborhoods and the zoning problems and the beautification problems that they were having along with that. And that just kind of morphed into this Good Landlord Program discussion, and Logan actually moved forward and adopted the Good Landlord Program primarily based around those two areas. And so
just when you're done, Joe.
So that's this is just kind of some of the ideas that we came up with as to things that we could possibly put into the Good Landlord Program to improve these areas. And then the next slide.
I'd like to see help.
Could I throw out those observations now? One of the challenges I observed in the last round of looking at the Good Landlord Program is one, it was on the priority list that was set by a previous council. Okay. And we had some new council members. Well, they weren't quite new. They've been on for, I think, a year already as we were discussing this. But again, I think it was still on the previous council priority list. I think one of the challenges from that was every council member had a different set of goals. And the way I know that is because Tiffany, if you remember Tiffany and I, sat down with every council member and interviewed them. What would you like to see out of us? And the reason we asked that question was, it's possible that because Provo really doesn't have a high crime or cost of service, disproportionate cost of service on the police and fire, that there may not be a huge financial or a huge disproportionate cost, at least comparative to some other cities. And so a really heavy program that wanted them to do a ton of things, the gut feeling was that many rental owners would say, that's not worth it if I just have 2 or 3 units. I'll just pay the fee and avoid the training. And the fact was that by and large, the majority of landlords owned only 2 or 3 units. There were very, proportionately, there was a few landlords that had over 100 units, but proportionally they're a very small sliver of all the landlords. And so having a very top-heavy or extensive program certainly would have captured the big units, but those big unit or complexes only would have captured maybe like 10% of all the units. And then a very low incentive for the mom and pops to participate. So that's the burden in trying to do too much in our community with this program. So again, I just come back and say, be very specific about why you want to do this so you get the program right.
And there's also a policy question to be asked: do we want to find so many fees that it essentially requires the landlord to take it, or do we want to make this an optional thing? Because if as Salt Lake's is $350, if you don't take the landlord program and it reduces it down to $20, that almost makes it mandatory for these landlords to go to it. Is that, maybe that's the interest of the council, or are you guys interested in a lower fee that makes it a little bit more optional, where they can absorb that $50 hit if they don't pay it? And so that's also a policy consideration to consider as well.
One of the considerations that I don't see on here is better housing for people who are renting.
It's not a comprehensive list by any means, but we just came up with a few. I think better housing could be.
We'll throw it on the board so I don't lose track of it.
Yeah.
Better specifically
in the sense that the facility, it's got heat and water and windows that open and close. I mean, living in the area where we have most of our rentals in the area in Provo, there are some that are just incredible, decrepit, and hopefully this would help improve them.
Yeah, and a decade, well, more than a decade now, the council adopted the rental dwelling licensing program, which was in part intended to solve those issues. The state legislature retorted and took away some of our abilities to require certain things. And I can't remember all the details, but
the ability is now back in, right?
Well, maybe through a different tool or mechanism to participate and get the disproportionate fee discount.
One way to couch some of that is in the name of health and safety.
Sure. Now, the one thing I'd like to ask Brian, and I'm not asking him to answer today, but as a research question, is if we are charging a disproportionate fee because of police and fire, but we want them to do, and assumingly that's because the police and fire calls are because of a problem with the tenants, right? Either health issues or crime issues or whatever. But then we're giving a discount to participate in a program to either beautify the lawns or improve the quality of the housing stock. I wonder if that creates a nexus problem between the disproportionate fee and the program that we're actually asking people to do. But
yeah, I think that's a good question. We could certainly look into that. I don't, off the top of my head, I don't think so, given that there's specific statutory authorization. If we were inventing a fee, then the nexus problem becomes much more problematic. But if the state has said you can charge this fee under these circumstances, we're probably okay, but it wouldn't hurt to look at that some more.
Just floating back.
Now, and if you have any other questions about this, we can come back to this. But the next slide, I just wanted to show this. Provo City actually has, in the first column, you'll see crime-free multi-housing. Provo City's police department, I believe, already does this program. And so I just kind of wanted to give you an idea of what that program entails versus the Good Landlord programs of both Ogden and Salt Lake, and I can't take credit for this. This is actually the work of Tiffany and Amy Harlow before me. But the multi-free housing program was based off the Mesa TriStar program, which is the third one over. And so they just wanted to kind of show the differences between each of those areas. BYU off-campus housing is also included in here. And so it's a good reference to see some of the things that the multi-housing crime-free program entails and what it doesn't entail versus what the Good Landlord program entails, and maybe why a Good Landlord program would be a good idea in addition to that other program. So, and I also have a few slides of what Logan, Utah requires the landlords to do, and that's here. And then the next slide is Salt Lake, which is a little bit more extensive. But if you have questions about that, we can get into those. But that was basically the extent of my presentation. I think we were interested in getting some feedback from the council as to what objectives you're looking to accomplish, if you want to move forward with the Good Landlord program, or if that isn't something that you're interested in moving forward in, or if you want to go in another phase. That's where we're at. So I'll turn the time over to you guys and the Matt.
I had a question. As I look at that list, I see a lot of it has to do, you know, if we decided, it seems to me I get the feel it should be enforcement. I don't know that we have a lot of crime. I don't think the crime was the issue at the time. It became more and more of an enforcement issue. And that seems to come back to, are we willing to fund the things that we need to do to have the enforcement that we've already got in place? Because if we start talking about more regulations, we're not funding ourselves sufficiently to enforce what we've got.
Well, I think that, you know, when we were talking initially, that's kind of the perception we got, is that that the previous council wasn't as interested in crime reduction as they were in zoning enforcement, and how can you implement some of these pieces to make sure that happens without increasing the cost and burden to the city. And so,
and that was probably a disconnect between the administration and the council in the last round, because actually it came up as a topic for discussion from the police department, who was interested in moving this forward as part of a three-pronged approach to some crime reduction measures. And so their initial proposal was very heavily crime focused. But then when we started talking to council members, it was more clear to focus someplace else, which I think develops a different type of responsive program.
yeah. So unless you have any more questions.
I do have one more, perhaps. What's the attitude of the apartment associations towards something like this? People who are landlords of quite a few apartments.
The meetings I've been in, last round we had, actually the mayor sponsored the meeting over at the Marriott, if you recall. We had head of the Realtors Association there, I think Taylor Oldroyd at the time, still is. Dee Dee Rose, which is acquaintance of Corey's slightly. I can't remember the other participants, but
we had is it Paul Smith? Paul Smith from the Apartment Association.
Paul Smith, both the Apartment Association and the Realtors Association are very much in favor of this type of program. Their rationale, and I think he could probably speak to it too, Mr. Wood, but I remember the rationale being, it's not in our interest as landlords to have a bad reputation, and we want these type of programs so we can be a trusted asset in communities. I don't know if that fairly, I'm sure there's other reasons too, but that was one of the takeaways I remember.
Yeah, landlords and property owners for the most part struggle with this initially. Why do I have to do this? I've been a landlord for 30 years. What are you going to teach me? I'm not going to learn anything. There was a great example of this in Provo less than 2 months ago. A gentleman who wound up on KSL because he discriminated against families with children. And he got right on TV and said, I've been doing this for 20 years, and I follow the law, but the law should be tempered with common sense. I've tried that with state troopers, and it just doesn't fly. You know, the law is the law. And so, yeah, we all get a bad reputation when landlords think they're following the law and they're in blatant violation of it. So a lot of people just don't know. And that's part of why the Apartment Association and the Board of Realtors are in favor of it, because they see a need for education. Even those people like this gentleman, he didn't mean anything by it. He wasn't trying to be cruel to anyone, and
I remember him characterizing it as just good business practice.
good business practice. But illegal business practice is still illegal business practice, and what he was doing was illegal. And unfortunately, in his case, it was such an easy workaround to get out of that entire mess. He could have solved with, one small phrase, I have a limit of 2 per bedroom. Perfectly legal, HUD takes that, but to say no kids crosses that line. So sometimes just education, may save that guy. Ultimately, I don't know if the Disability Law Center has filed suit against him yet, but they probably will. He's facing hundreds of thousands of dollars in fines, penalties, for something as simple as advertising and saying, I don't take children. So we can save landlords a ton of money, potentially. And they usually come away from it going, that was good information, I didn't know that. There's practical things like how to do an eviction, when to do an eviction. A lot of these problems are because the landlords are afraid of their tenants, and I don't want to kick them out. Causing crime on your property, let me help you get them out. We walk them through those steps.
I have a question.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
do you have a presentation, or had you just come to respond to questions?
I invite
Well-
Mr. Wood to present any additional information you felt.
I'm more than happy to get up and talk for a few minutes, and then I can just field questions. But to be honest, the questions are probably more appropriate, because I'm sure you have 100 in your mind, and okay, you gotta help me answer these. But I'll just give you a little bit of information. And I apologize for talking to the back of some of you. Sorry about that. When this originally started in Ogden, it was because of the crime. They had a really bad crime problem. I know that's not shocking to you. You've been in Utah any period of time that Ogden has a lot of crime, but they were tired of it. And so they implemented the program, and as an apartment association, we came back and said, look, it's a lot for our owners to bear. It's a pretty big burden. What if we educate them and show you that we can follow some of these rules and some of these things that you put in place? And in the first year, crime dropped 31%. And so that was significant, because that really, all the other things, beautification, all that aside, Ogden just wanted less crime. But even today, almost 10 years later, only 85% of the landlords participate in the program because it's still voluntary. And so from a city standpoint, they do have an increase in revenue because 15% paid a higher rate. They don't want to take the training. They are out of state, don't want to fly in, whatever it might be. They get more revenue, and their cost for services has gone down. So it's kind of a win-win. One of the unintended consequences, and this was published by the Utah Housing Coalition a couple of years after the program was started, was crime increased in surrounding cities. On average, it was about a 10% increase in South Ogden and Washington Terrace, and Roy and Sunset and Clinton and Clearfield, and every one of those cities has a good landlord program now. So from a socioeconomic problem, you don't solve crime, you move crime. But as I teach my landlords, that's not really my problem, that's not your problem. If you're a landlord, what you're trying to solve is crime on your property. As a city, does that solve crime in Provo? No, not necessarily, but does it move it to Orem or Springville? Yeah, and then it becomes an Orem or Springville problem. So in some ways, you want to try and get on the front end of this before Orem and Springville have good landlord programs, and everyone moves to your city. That increases your crime. Now, in Salt Lake City, for example, they don't mandate things the same way they do in Ogden. In Salt Lake, just about everything is voluntary. It's recommended. It's recommended that you do a background check. It's recommended that you run a credit report. We try and teach good principles and good practices that whether the city mandates or not, that's a good business practice. Because I'm going to rent you my apartment. I'm going to loan you $12,000 this year. I'm going to give you my property, and I hope you take care of it. I've got to know something about you. And the best way to know that is to look at their background. do a background check on them, see if there's a criminal past, see if there's previous evictions, see if they pay their bills. That's going to get you typically a better tenant than just saying, he looks like a good guy, I'm going to let him move in. So it gives landlords a little bit of ammunition for what they're supposed to do, but it also helps them understand these are some basic things, like we talked about the Fit Premises Act. I have to provide a fit premises for my tenants. That's a big thing in Salt Lake City. They're huge on, we want to make sure that the properties are well taken care of. And actually, I do tenant training as well. I do tenant training for the Housing Coalition. And that's one of the things that I teach them is you have rights under the Fit Premises Act. If you have a bad landlord, there's some things that you can do to kind of force the issue. And it's kind of funny, it's gotten to the point when Salt Lake City has a tenant problem they can't solve, they send them to me, which is great, which they paid me for that, but yeah, that's the nonprofit portion of my business. It doesn't make a whole lot. But it allows you an avenue to have better homes, better rentals for your tenants as well. You talked about some of the areas where you have really bad rentals. I went to BYU 25 years ago. I can only imagine they're worse now than they were then, and they were pretty bad then. So, you know, that same basement apartment I lived in probably looks pretty much the same as it did 25 years ago and hasn't been improved at all, which is a shame. This gives you an opportunity from a council standpoint to enact some regulations. This is what we'd like to see. And just from a business standpoint, it helps them understand a little bit of investment will give you a bigger return. In fact, that's one of Salt Lake City's objectives, is to increase property values. They give 4 objectives: to better maintain and operate properties, more profitable property ventures, decrease crime, and increase property values. So they're trying to sell this to landlords and property owners that your properties will go up if you follow some of these basic principles. We teach fair housing. We teach abandonment law. We teach the crime prevention through environmental design. We teach inspections and screening. So we cover a wide base. You have the opportunity to write it however you'd like. I'm more than happy to give you a copy of my presentation. You can use it verbatim. You can add anything you'd like or make any changes you'd like to it. It's your program. You get to design it. So it's not something that you have to take, well, everyone else is doing exactly like this. I guess we better toe the line and do it. You have a unique situation here, different than everywhere with the possible exception of Logan. Logan has a lot of student housing, so they have similar issues in a lot of their areas, but Provo's a unique place. I think it would benefit from a good landlord program. You will get initially some pushback from landlords. Too much regulation, too much government interference, too much looking into my business. There was an op-ed piece by Pamela Openshaw about 6 months ago where she talked about the LGBT community now saying that we have to rent to gay and lesbian tenants and we have no control or no rights over that. And as I read the article, I thought she really needs some education on this, because there's actually federal exemption from fair housing law that says if you're a private individual and you have less than 3 units, you're not governed by fair housing. You do not have to obey fair housing laws. If I don't want to rent to you because you're Mormon and I have a single family home, I can say no simply because you're LDS. I'll still get sued for that, but I'll win because I'm exempt from fair housing. If I don't want to rent to you because you're gay, I can do that. I'm exempt from fair housing laws if I just have a single family home.
That's up to 3 units.
Up to
a triplex.
3 units. A triplex, 3 single family homes, as long as you're a private individual. If you put them into an LLC or a family trust or something like that, you lose that exemption. But if you want to rent your basement apartment, and that's what this was really provided for. Grandma wants to rent her basement apartment to a cute little LDS girl. She can rent to a cute little LDS girl and deny everyone else that comes because you're a guy, you're not LDS, you're a guy, oh, there's my cute little LDS girl, you can move in now. That's why that exemption is there. Most landlords, most owners, these small owners, this 90% we talked about, don't even realize that. They think they're breaking the law when in effect they're not. So Just try and help them understand what they can and can't do.
Here's my question.
Okay.
Seems like a lot of these things are good. It's good business practice. We get the tenants. We can maintain some personal property rights that we thought maybe are gone. Where I'm having a hard time shift is why is this shift the city's burden and not the landlord's burden? In other words, that man that maybe is going to be sued for hundreds of thousands of dollars because he just wanted, because he had an app that said on the ropes right to children. Well, is that the city's responsibility to educate all landlords so they know those laws? Or why is it not that the landlord, I mean, that's good business practice to know what the law is if you're going to be a landlord. I'm not seeing the...
Okay, I have a thought on that. I think, again, it depends on what you want to achieve as a council. Training doesn't have to include those type of segments. It could, again, your interest as a city is rentals may or may not, and they do, based off last time, they have a disproportionate cost in some areas. It costs you more as a city to rent to those than anybody else. And so your interest as a city is leveling the playing field and recouping your costs. And now the program is, again, I think, designed to achieve your objectives and what you think actually will help reduce costs and your strategy for doing that. And the training could include a broad, comprehensive list of issues, or it could be very specific to the nexus of the cost, the crime prevention, or zoning enforcement rules that you got to keep your lawn watered and don't have broken windows.
And I think that's the main thing is what is your focus on this? What are our objectives? If there's ancillary benefits to landlords, then that's great to sell those.
Right.
Hey, we want to do this just to force you, but look at all these other good things you get from this.
So if it's cost recovery, the cost recovery would obviously require enforcement. And that means every year we're going to charge this fee. That means somehow we're going to have to go visit every rental property.
Well, you already have a rental program, so they should
Yeah,
be
but
registered.
Matt, you know as well as I do that we can't even enforce Mr. Miller's example about second kitchen laws. We don't enforce those. They're on the books, and we have arguments every time I put a kitchen in the
Well, they're
basement.
enforced on a complaint basis.
Well, I think that's the purpose of the kind of program that you're talking about, right? Because what happens is you pay the higher fee unless you prove you're compliant. It's not our burden to go out and see if they're compliant. It's their burden to prove that they were compliant. So they pay the higher fee unless they go get the certificate.
How do you know, though, say your objective is to increase the beauty of the city? Are they watering their grass? Are they trimming their trees? Is their fence painted? Is there sidewalk? They come in and say, yeah, we're doing all that.
Well,
okay, we only have to pay 20 instead of 340?
Every proposal that we've seen has involved an outside company running the program. Right? I mean,
no, just the training.
It's not the enforcement.
Not the program.
But
So
the training,
okay, actually, the outside stuff's probably the easiest to deal with.
Well,
Because to get their business license,
I don't use
they
that
send a
example
picture
because
in.
that was an easy one
I'm just saying,
to use. Yeah.
it's you're right. Somebody at the city's going to have to verify.
So
compliance.
is that cost to verify, to enforce, is that part of the recovery cost?
Part of the base administrative fee.
So if we're reducing their cost to $20 a year, that will cover the enforcement and I don't see that.
Well,
so can I
We
ask
can't afford
a question?
doing what laws we have now.
And maybe Tom can help with this, but as I was researching this, it seems like this program is designed more to educate your landlords on the things that they can do to increase property value, to increase the aesthetics so that people are attracted to their property so they can charge more money if that's an element that we want to.
So then we're shifting and saying, okay, then our objective is to educate landlords.
And that's what I understood this to be as an education piece for landlords to go through. So some may not run background checks right now. Well, the apartment association comes in, trains them on reasons why they should run background checks.
But it seems like when we discussed this before, we had a couple of management company people come and say, we do all this. He had his forms, he had his program.
a lot of the big companies do. Again, I think that's why it was an issue of when, what is that number, between 70 and 90% of the units are
Owned by smaller owners.
mom and pop, 1, 2, 3 unit owners. It wouldn't solve the problem with generally a low fee and a huge laundry list of requirements, and so that's again an idea of what are you
And
really
I don't
trying
mean
to
to
solve.
be, I'm just trying to
Yeah.
say, focus, what's our objective? And if you go back to that policy of, okay, what's our objective? You put this, I'm taking one and saying, okay, how does it fulfill that objective? And they're just all these other.
Well, several cities have established
I
a
don't know.
complaint-based cause for kicking them off of a good landlord program. Too many calls for services to the same address or repeated calls, too many code violations, things like that can get you kicked off the program. To give you an example, when I first managed in Salt Lake City, I managed a 522 unit community. $342 per unit is $178,000. That would be my business license cost. If I take the training, 4-hour training, I pay $10,000. I will do everything I possibly can not to get kicked off the program because I don't want to pay $168,000. I'll use an example here in town, and it's a little bit embarrassing because I used to be the VP for the company that owned the property, but the Boulders Apartments, which some of you may know.
We're familiar, just vaguely.
Yeah, I thought maybe you might be. Sorry, I left them a long time ago, so that's not my problem anymore. But the Boulders is a great example. 370 apartments. How many calls for services do you have down there? If you went to them and said, look, it's going to be $200 a unit, or get your freaking act together, or we're going to kick you out. You do what you're supposed to, and it's $20 a unit. You keep causing these problems, we're going to charge you $200 or $250 or $342 a unit. They will find a way to fix their problems if they're faced with $178,000 or $10,000 in cost. Because up to this point, and I know the owners extremely well, there's no incentive for them to do anything different. Why would we bother? There's no penalty. We don't lose anything. So we keep renting to Valley Mental Health patients. We keep renting to the same type of people. We keep having the same problems, and the problems don't get fixed. So this is a way to force some people's hands. It's worked in other cities. I know it's worked in Clearfield. Clearfield's probably the strictest as far as enforcement of this. Stacy rules it with an iron fist. She's a great gal, but boy, don't cross her because she'll kick you off the program. Salt Lake, on the other hand, is very generous. You can have 4 or 5 violations before they reach a point of, we're just done. So you get to set that. You get to say what's reasonable to people. Have they made progress? Have we seen improvements at the Boulders, or are we going to kick you off? And again, for them, if there's a $100,000 difference, there's your incentive to make it look nice. There's your incentive to decrease crime. It's a monetary incentive.
So again, using the example of the Boulders, so if we implemented something like this, we have to have an inspector go in and inspect each one of those apartments.
Yeah.
Depends on what you want to do.
If you want to do that, that's great. But do you have inspectors that can go and inspect 370 units?
We don't.
Probably not. But you can complaint-based, which you probably already do anyway.
So the landlord's going to certify to us that all the things that we require are in those apartments and done.
That's what they do now. I mean, I'm assuming that because I've managed for so many years. We don't typically get inspectors that just randomly come out unless there's a problem. Weeds are 12 inches high, or there's trash piled up on the property, or there's a big hole in the roof, or things like that. Unless it's complaint-based or something obvious from the street, inspectors just don't come. So, yeah, are we trusting them? Yes, and for the most part, probably 90% of your landlords and your owners do a good job, and they are good. But it's that 10% that give us a bad reputation and give a city a bad reputation. There was another incident almost a year ago where there was a property near campus that legally, apparently, went into their tenants' apartments and stole their pumpkins, threw them away. Well, that was illegal. You can't do that. Substitute pumpkin for couch or television. They went into people's homes and stole their personal belongings and disposed of them. This was a big management company. This is a big community. They should have known better, but yet they broke the law. And what happened to them? Nothing. But Provo looks bad because I guess we look the other way for stuff like that. I don't know. It's embarrassing as a landlord when stuff like that happens because it reflects badly on me and my profession and everything I've ever done.
Whether we got here bad advice or I don't know, but when we did this study last time, it didn't slice it in a way that let us highlight something like the boulders. And so the data.
And I can bring it up because it used to be mine. So.
Yeah, well, and I think that was one of the things we lacked when we did it last time was a serious, wow, this is cool, we could change some dynamics here. So here you may have gotten bad advice, but what we were looking at was a small differentiation for a place like the Boulders that they could actually say, I'm becoming compliant. Not the $100 per unit.
Well, and my
and
recommendation.
there's that was based off one study that solely looked at police and fire costs. One of the things we didn't study was the cost of zoning enforcement. And
But
the
my guess is
disproportionate costs there.
Boulders would have police and fire that have been off the chart, but it was the way we sliced the city.
Well, then Matt Godfrey came in and said,
yeah,
you can do that, but his proposal was to focus on BYU as one service area, or at least the area around BYU, and the rest of the city as another service area. It just happened to be the Boulders is in that other service area, so they were averaged down to the lower cost level. You could certainly approach it a different way,
Well, so a couple thoughts here. Matt, maybe I'm wrong because it's been a long time since we talked about it. I think it was actually the reverse. That Godfrey's proposal was
it may have been
if we took BYU housing out of the study, it raised everybody else's costs because BYU housing is actually way cheaper. They don't have high disproportionate costs. So, but the problem that the council had as a policy matter was, is it fair to have a completely different set of rules for housing that is either BYU affiliated versus housing that's not BYU affiliated, or housing that's within a certain geographical area around BYU versus housing that's everywhere else in the city? And that was the problem, because so the issue that you face as far as whether the tool works is you've got to analyze these three questions. One is, can you, based on the study that you already have, can you achieve any objectives given the very small difference? My recollection is it wasn't $50 to $80 per unit. I think it was, and I could be wrong, but I think it was like $37.50 for the base fee and $50 for the disproportionate cost. So it was like $13 a unit difference or something like that. So
that's what I remember.
It was so small that the council looked at it and said, there's no way that anybody will do anything for this amount of money, so we can't achieve any objectives. So then Godfrey came in. So one thing is, can you achieve any objectives with a really small differential? Two is, can you slice and dice the study you've already got in a way to make it so there's a bigger differential? And that was Matt Godfrey's proposal, which is, let's carve out basically the South Campus area and create one set of rules for them and another set of rules for everybody else in the city. I'm not saying what the answer to that is, but the council at the time really struggled with whether that was an appropriate solution to the situation. And then the third option is, if you can't do either of those two things, do you want to go pay for a third study, and can you get results from not a third study, a second study? Can you get results from a new study that gives you enough of a fee to accomplish something? And then all of those are a completely separate question from what Kay's question is, which is, do you have policy objectives that you want to try to accomplish through a tool like this?
And I think those are the questions that have to happen first, though.
Yeah.
Or answers.
Well, yeah. I mean, you could approach it either way. You could do this side first and say, there's not a. It's not going to. The tool's not going to work whether we have policy objectives or not. Right. I mean, but it's a policy decision to decide which one of the two questions to answer first.
Are we going to hit the same thing we hit with business licenses? Yeah, we're going to go cap it now with disproportionate. Anyway. Yeah, for business licenses, because these businesses require all this, and we went through that whole process and all those studies and all those numbers, and we came up with those business license changes, and we got so much pushback that we just. So now we're going to just say, if we cut out BYU and we have this new, and we say, okay, the only way this is going to work is if we have incentive enough, so the difference between compliant and non-compliant is enough that it will force them to comply. That means we're going to be throwing this pretty high number out to rentals and to landlords and saying, if you don't, instead of now paying $13 more, you're going to be paying $150 more. There's going to be such pushback.
There is initially.
I don't know how
Every
I
city
would
is
pull
pushed
that
back.
off.
It has not been easy in any city.
And this is where we bring up the business license fee problem that we had.
One thing that the council budget committee is working on right now is fees in general, and working on, is there an overall framework or philosophy about how we apply fees, and how much of that is cost recovery do we apply in certain categories. And one of the challenges from my observation of the last round of this, in the business licensing round, was in both circumstances, there wasn't, the council hadn't convened and said, again, here is the policy objective we want to accomplish. So when people came out of the woodwork and said, you know, why are you doing this to us, the council could never come back and say, in clear, articulate terms, here's what we're trying to accomplish. We understand your concern, but we are politically committed to our objective. And I think that having the discussion about what is the philosophy behind fees and cost recoveries could go a long way, as long as you're politically committed to that objective, in saying thank you for your concern, but we do have these set of philosophies and principles that we are approaching issues on.
Let's conclude on that note. Thank you very kindly for what was most informative. This will be a primary item in our next leadership meeting. We'll return to the council subsequently with some recommended steps forward.
I would just maybe add one thing. If in fact it is one of our objectives to have quality rental housing, that might include that BYU area, regardless of whether it has higher demand from higher. I think it should still be in there, maybe at the same rates.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. We are adjourned.
Thank you.
Mayor, do you just take a second?
Oh, in an unofficial capacity, can Carrie,
What?
whoever that guy is over there with ugly socks, share a thought with you, an invitation with you.
One thought.
Yeah, one thought exactly. No, I'll be very brief. At the end of this month, the mayor and I and the administration want to invite members of the council to go with us down to southern Utah to go through a canyon. This is not any canyon.
End of this month or end of October?
The end of October. Sorry. I've already shifted gears from month into October. Rooftop concert series has me going that way. So at the end of the month, we're planning on taking the directors and want to extend the invitation to you also to go with us down the canyon. It's Larry Canyon is the name of it. It's about 225 miles away. It's a canyon that will take us roughly the balance of the day. We're going to plan on leaving here on the 30th, go through on Halloween Day, and then come back on Saturday morning. It's a lot of fun. It's ones that I've done with our youth group at church several times, and it's a great time.
And it is a true retreat.
It is. You will be in the middle of nowhere. Nowhere.
So that was Corey missed the retreat conversation.
Sorry.
Is it a hike?
It's a hike. What we'll do, we'll drive in. You know where Goblin Valley is?
Mm-hmm.
So the turnoff from Goblin Valley, if you're going on 24, is to your right. It's to your left. What's that? No, you're hiking through a canyon.
Right. So we need to warn them. The number of directors are not coming because of the physical limitations. So
there are some demands.
There are some demands.
Sure.
We've made it very optional.
Part of it's rappelling.
Yeah, so there's about 4 or 5 different rappels. You can down climb several locations, but it's about 4 or 5 different rappels, and it is you're in the middle of a slot canyon. So some of our directors have an issue high walls with claustrophobia. And it's
Flash
really,
floods.
it's open and it's amazing and it's beautiful, and I can show you pictures and videos and stuff that we did, that we've done. It really is an incredible, once in a lifetime opportunity if you haven't had it.
We're, correct me if I'm wrong, we're not using city dollars.
Right, we're not using city dollars. We're raising money to be able to go do this, and so this, I've got a list of things to do as far as a checklist of items that you need to bring that I'm going to send out to the directors and those who have RSVP'd already. And but I need to know relatively quick fashion if you're interested in going, just so we can get a head count so we can make a deposit on the trip. So that was quick, right?
Thank you.
Thank you. It's over Halloween.
Yes, get out of town for Halloween. Nobody needs to be here.
Thank you.
Halloween stinks.
I might just roll